All right. Welcome back, everybody. We are going to jump in here to the Futato exercises for Unit 1. And we're looking at Chapter 17 from last week. So let's pull that up in our textbook and look at the practice. We're looking at A, B, C, D, G, and H. So no E, no F. All right. So what we're looking at here is the connection between the form of the demonstrative pronoun and its function. Now, I'm sure we've covered, yes, the adjective. That's what I wanted to double check here. Now, we call this a demonstrative pronoun. Technically, it's a demonstrative adjective when it's functioning predicatively. Then it's functioning as a noun. No, that's not right. That would be predicative. Also, when it's functioning substantively, it would be a pronoun. But when the demonstrative is functioning attributively, then it's going to be considered it's an adjective. It's just like when we learned adjectives, they can function attributively, predicatively, and substantively. Well, here, when we have our demonstrative, it can function attributively, predicatively, or substantively. And when it functions predicatively or substantively, then technically it's acting as a pronoun. But don't get confused between the terminology of demonstrative adjective versus demonstrative pronoun. Adjective versus pronoun, that's basically talking about the function, what sort of relationship is the demonstrative having toward its antecedent, I guess. So again, just like we talked about with the adjective, when we look at the demonstrative, here we have ze as our demonstrative, we're going to be looking for the same types of clues that we looked for with the adjective. If the demonstrative and its noun agree in definiteness, that is, usually if the demonstrative has the article, it's going to be attributive. Also, just like the adjective, the attributive demonstrative is going to tend to come after. So the attributive will usually come after the noun. So keeping that in mind, we can see here that both have the article and the demonstrative comes after, so this is going to be the attributive use. We're going to translate that as, literally it would be the mouth, the this, but we translate that as this mouth. Which mouth? This one. That's why it's attributive, because it's an actual adjective here. What type of mouth? This mouth, okay? That's the adjective form. So as we go down here, and again, you'll be able to find these translations in your books. So in the answer key. So what I'm going to point out is just these clues that I talked about. All of these, I guess, you're told are attributive, so you're just focusing on the translation. But you can see in every single one of these, you've got the definite article. All the way down, and in every single one, it looks like it comes after its noun. Now let's see if there's any case where you don't have an article on the noun. Yeah, in every single one of these you have an article on the noun as well. Now number 12 here and number 11, these two are interesting because you've got more than just two words here. So number 11, you've got ha-anashim, ha-tovim, ha-haim. So again, if you literally just translated this word by word, you would have the men, the good ones, the them, or the those. Okay? So, or the that, but again, that plural, so it would be the those. So since it's attributive, we know it's attributive because it comes after its noun. Here, ha-anashim is the noun. We've got another adjective here, ha-tovim, but ha-haim is modifying ha-anashim because it comes after its noun and it agrees in definiteness. that means that what we have here is an attributive. So we are going to end up translating number 11 as those good men. All right, and then the same for number 12. We've got ha-regel, ha-tamea, ha-hi. So ha-regel, goodness, regel I'm pretty sure means foot. I have to think about that. Let's take a look here real quick. Regel. There we go. Yeah, that's what I thought, but I had to think about it here. So the foot, tame, this is going to be the, tame is impure or unclean. So the unclean foot, the that one. Now he here, this is feminine, but that's because regel is feminine. A lot of the segolets are feminine, whether they look like it or not. Even though it doesn't have the comets hey ending, oftentimes segolets will be feminine anyways. So here you've got that unclean foot. All right. So Jason, good to see you. If you have anything in particular that you want to cover from the lesson, let me know what it is. You can tell me. You can throw it in the chat, whatever you prefer. But if not, we'll just continue to go through the Futato exercises here. So let me know if you have any questions, and feel free to interrupt me anytime, because when I've got Futato up here, obviously I can't see what's going on in the chat. So chirp up anytime you want.
Okay, thank you. Sorry I was running late here.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I do have a question. And it's a really broad question,
Sure.
but at the same time, maybe it's really simple. I think I'm getting like the nuts and bolts of the grammar this week.
Mm-hmm.
But I am having trouble answering the question, why does this matter? How does it fit in the larger framework of the other things that we have been learning? And as I got into like the Futato exercises and things, I was having trouble with the translation, because I was like, I don't know how this affects the rest of the sentence, and I couldn't assimilate it into the other things I'd learned very well.
Now, are you talking about lesson 18, the lesson for unit 2?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So, the basic ideas here, the one yod and the one aleph, all this is saying is in Hebrew 1, let me see where we covered it. In lesson 11, so we learned the cal perfect conjugation in lesson 6, and then in lesson 11, we started to learn the cal imperfect. And all that we're doing here now is we're acknowledging that some of the letters in the Hebrew alphabet are tricky. That when you put them into certain places in words, they do weird things. So, for example, aleph is a guttural, and so one of the features of gutturals is that aleph cannot take a dagesh, and gutturals also do not like shavaz. And so the reason why it's important to cover this is when we go to the one alephs, you'll see that you usually expect in the imperfect, you have your imperfect prefix, which is either yod hirik, tav hirik, aleph segel, or nun hirik. Those are your imperfect prefixes. And then you usually get a silent shava under the first root letter, which closes that first syllable, which is why you end up with yik, tol as two syllables here. But of course, the aleph being a guttural, doesn't like shavas, and it especially doesn't like silent shavas. And the other thing to realize about the aleph in particular, this is not true of all gutturals, but this is true of the aleph. When the aleph is supposed to close a syllable, just like the kaf does here, something happens. There's a phenomenon that the aleph experiences called quiescence. And quiescence basically means that not only is Aleph a very weak letter being a guttural, not only is Aleph a very weak letter being silent, like the ayin, but Aleph is the weakest of all letters in that when you close a syllable with ayin, it can actually close the syllable. But when you close a syllable with Aleph, the Aleph is so weak, it can't handle the pressure of closing a syllable that it quiesces. And what that means, think the word quiet. It's already silent. Quiescence means that the Aleph, it's technically here, but it has no value whatsoever. It not only does it not have pronunciation value, it has no syllabic value. It's almost like what you're looking at is a shadow of the Aleph rather than the Aleph itself. It
Okay.
simply cannot close this syllable, which means that when you've got an open, since it can't close the syllable, you've now got an open pre-tonic syllable. Hebrew demands a long vowel in that situation, or what Futato refers to as a medium vowel. Either way, a short vowel like Hirik won't cut it, and so that's why you get the lengthening of the vowel here. So the reason why this is important for what we're learning is not because it changes the meaning or the translation. It's important because you're going to see vowels in first Alephs that you're not used to seeing. You're used to seeing a Hirik in the prefix of an imperfect, but when you get to the one Aleph, all of a sudden you don't see the Hirik. So now you're thinking to yourself, well, how do I even know what conjugation this is? Because, yeah, I mean, it's got a prefix, but in the imperfect, I'm used to a Hirik prefix vowel and a holum theme vowel. And here I have a holum prefix and a patak theme vowel. Like, what is going on? These chapters on the weak verbs are simply here to show you that when certain letters that are really wacky get into a certain position in a word, a lot of times the spelling is going to go through some drastic changes. And so
Okay.
that happens even more pronouncedly with the, I just said pronouncedly. I don't know if that's right, but I feel good about it. That happens even more drastically with the one yod. Now, this one yod parenthesis yod, this is what we refer to as a true one yod verb. And the only irregularity in the true one yods is that it doesn't get the shava that you expect. Now, part of the reason for that is this sort of obscure rule in Hebrew orthography, I guess. It's called the Skinnem-Levy rule. And the reason why it's called the Skinnem-Levy rule is, let me see if there's a way for me to easily, no, let me just pull up Word. So the Skinnem-Levy rule, we'll just write up here. Skinnem-Levy is a mnemonic. It's a way to help us remember the rule. So Skinnem-Levy, okay? Any letter in Hebrew that makes one of these sounds. So anything that makes an S sound, like samek or shin or sen. I guess maybe not shin, but sen. Samek in particular, kaf, nun, mem, lamed, vav, and yod. These letters, when they close a syllable with a silent shavah, for whatever reason, that silent shavah will just disappear. It's there's not a great explanation for it other than that, but that's exactly what has happened here. Is this yod is one of the Skinnem-Levy letters, and so where we would expect to see a shavah, we don't. The other irregularity, it's not that irregular because when we learned the imperfect, we learned the theme vowel of the imperfect as the holum. There's really two primary theme vowels. I mean, we might say that the primary theme vowel is holum, but patak is very, very common in the imperfect, just like it's the primary theme vowel in the perfect as well. So you could note that this is another slight irregularity, But patak in the imperfect theme vowel is so common that irregularity may be a bit strong of a word. So, all that to say, when you come to a true one yod, you can probably figure out what's going on here because, you've still got your prefix with the hirik. You still have your root yod. I mean, it doesn't have a vowel or a shavah, but it's still there. This isn't too hard to figure out. But when you get to, instead of the one yod yod, when you get to the one yod vav, this one down here, this is where it gets a little bit confusing. Now, the difference between a one yod yod, which we call a true one yod, and a one yod vav is this. Way, 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 way back in ancient Hebrew, before scripture was written, before the time of the writing of the Bible, early Hebrew, there are a lot of Hebrew roots that in scripture, the first letter is yod. But these one yod vavs, these are verbs that even though the first letter is yod in the Bible, in ancient Hebrew, the first letter used to be vav. And because the first letter used to be vav, these words are going to conjugate differently than first yods where the first letter was always yod. These are different types of verbs because they used to have a different first root letter. And so you can see how different they are here. If this were a true one yod, this is yeshav. If yeshav were a true one yod, we would expect it to conjugate as ye, the yod hirik yod, shav with the shen patak bait. But because it's a one yod vav, something weird happens. What happens here is we called the one yod yod a true one yod. We can think of the one yod vav as a fake one yod or a poser one yod. The first root letter, the yod here, it knows it's not a true one yod. So when you put a prefix on there, it scrams. It gets out of there. When you add that prefix yod or that prefix tav, prefix aleph, or prefix noon, the one yod knows that it's an imposter, and so it bounces. It's gone. And as a result, the prefix hirik, in order to compensate for the loss of that R1 letter, that first root letter, it's going to lengthen from a hirik to a sere. And then, in order to complement the lengthening, we're going to lengthen also our patak to a sere as well. And so what you're going to get with the one yod vavs, this is a very distinct pattern that you will pick up on more and more and more. When you have a three-letter verbal, I don't want to say root because this is actually conjugated, but when you have a verb word and it's got three letters and the vowel pattern is sere sere, especially if the first letter is either yod, tav, aleph, or noon, you can be pretty sure that what you're looking at is a cal imperfect one yod vav. That sere sere pattern in the first two root letters, I shouldn't say root letters, because remember the yod, this is not the root yod, this is the prefix yod. And you can tell that when you get down here to the 3fs, you've got a prefix tav. The root yod is gone. But when you see the three letters with a sere sere pattern, that is overwhelmingly indicative of a one yod vav. And so the reason why we stop here at less than 18 and we look at what are the unique characteristics of how a one yod yod and a one yod vav are formed is so that when you get in your text and you see something like this, you can remember, hey, I learned this sere sere pattern. Just because it doesn't look anything like yiktol, which is the strong version, the regular version of this verb, I still know that this is a cal imperfect. I've got my imperfect prefix, and the sere sere pattern tells me that this just happens to be the cal imperfect form of a fake one yod, what we call a one yod vav. Does that make sense?
Yes, that helps a lot. Those technical matters really help, but I think that the thing that helped the most was when you said that we're dealing with a certain group of words that starts with these very particular letters.
Yeah.
For some reason, as I got into it, I didn't catch that right away, and I thought we were learning some massive grammar principle that I wasn't catching on to. But
yeah,
we're
yeah.
dealing
So
with a particular way to deal with the beginning of certain words.
yeah, and so a way to think of it is a grammar issue is usually going to affect meaning, whereas this doesn't affect meaning. So instead of calling it a grammar issue, we'll call this like a morphological issue. Morphological is just a big word for
Yeah.
the shape of the word or like how we end up spelling
Yep.
it. So this doesn't change the meaning of the word from the regular. The strong imperfects have the same meaning as the weak imperfects. It's just they're going to be written differently because they've got funky letters that like to do funky things. And
Yep.
if you don't know about the funky things these letters do, then you're going to see a word and you're going to be like, I have no idea how to parse that because I'm not seeing any of the characteristic signs that I'm used to seeing.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
walking me through that.
No problem. Any other questions?
I do not have any.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna continue going through what is it, chapter 17, last week's exercises. You are more than welcome to hang out if anything pops up, or if let me see what else. I want to make sure if there's anything else I'm going to cover, I let you know what that is. Sometimes I'll also go through the vocabulary, and like for example, let's take a look here. So for example, I'll try to give some mnemonics for how to memorize vocabulary. So, behema, a pretty common um, mnemonic for behemoth is to think when you see behemoth, think behemoth. The only thing that's a really large animal. The only thing you have to be careful of is behemoth is specifically a domesticated animal. So it's not like a wild animal, it's a domesticated animal. And behemoth might make you think wild, so that's where you got to be careful. But another one, bakar. It's hard to pronounce that final resh. Um, I have a bad mnemonic for this, and so I probably shouldn't even share it because I don't want to confuse. But my bad mnemonic, it's almost like a false mnemonic. This specific, just like behemoth, specifically refers to large domesticated animals. Bakar is a way of referring to a group, a collective word for a group. So it'd be like a flock of birds or a herd of cattle. But bakar is specifically used for large domesticated animals. And so my mnemonic, if you've ever had Spanish, the word for cow in Spanish is vaca. And so bakar, that's how I remembered it. But again, it's a tricky mnemonic because you might think it's just one cow. Son, this is specifically bakar and son are very closely related words. Bakar is the collective word for large domesticated animals. Son is the collective word for small domesticated animals. So a flock of sheep or flock of goats would be a son rather than a bakar. And then yavesh. I had a really dumb one too, and sometimes the dumber they are, the more memorable they are.
Yeah.
But I basically said my wife's flowers withered because I didn't put them in yavesh, like a vase. So usually they're more effective when you come up with them yourself. When they're silly, when they're crazy, the more memorable they are. But so let's see, that was 17. Let's take a look at 18 here. Ruach, this is, sometimes people will know Ruach before they even take Hebrew because it's the word for spirit. Avad, my terrible mnemonic for this was if I don't evade my pursuers, I will perish. That's bad because now I'm going to think that avoid means evade, and it doesn't. But it worked for me at the time. Oh, here's a good one. Okay, so I don't know if we've done a Hav yet. Let me see if we have. Where does a Hav come in? Okay, chapter 20. So this won't make a ton of sense until we get to a Hav in chapter 20, but I'm just going to throw it out there now so that if I forget later on. Um, all right, so the two words that probably were the trickiest for me, gave me the most trouble. Let me bump this up. Let me go to SBL Hebrew. All right, so we've got Ahav, and we've got Va. And as you can see, these are very similar. It's just the second and third letters get reversed. I
Yeah.
would always get them confused. Ahav means I love, and Ava means I want to or I am willing or something like that. And the way that I finally distinguished them was, let me do this. Okay, Ahav means love, and Ava means want, willing. That's pretty good. The word love ends with a V sound. Ahav ends with a V sound. So love ends with the V, ahav ends with the V. Ava has the V sound early, which makes me think of like voluntary. So having to do with the will, volitional, that sort of idea. So when you've got one of these two words and the V sound comes early, it's this voluntary volitional, I want, I'm willing. When the V sound comes at the end, it's love, like the V sound comes at the end there. So that's one way to kind of keep them distinct. It can be really tricky to separate them out, but those two, hopefully, when we get to Ahav in chapter 20, you won't get confused there. These two are also sort of tricky. A lot of students get these confused. The difference here is between the initial hey and the initial chet. All right, so hey, yod, hey, is to happen or to come about or to appear or begin or have an origin or something like that. Think begin, think come about, that sort of thing, happen. The difference between to be and to live is that the emphasis here is on life, a living thing. Haya, anything can come to be. It happened that we ran out of milk the other day, or it happened that the rock fell from the cliff or something like that. It doesn't have to be a living thing. The man was, or you could say the tree was in the midst of the garden, something like that. Haya there, well, I guess tree is living. You could say that the sword was in the sheath. Okay, so Haya here, this is just about existence versus something that's alive. My terrible mnemonic for this, I also had become as one of the meanings, was I would say, Hiya, I want to become a ninja or something. Or I'm becoming a ninja would be better because you don't want it to mean I want. But Hiya, I'm becoming a ninja or something. Kaya, this is specifically related to living creatures, living things, something that has life in it. So that's the difference between those two. Let's see what else we've got here. Yom and Yom can sometimes get confused. Yom means sea, and Yom with the yod Holam Vav Mem, that means day. So remember to keep those distinct. Yam Suf is the Hebrew name for what often gets called the Red Sea, Yam Suf. So if you've ever heard that, that may help you remember that that's sea. And then Tsava, Sava really means like a horde or a huge group or a multitude or something like that. But usually, when it's used in the Hebrew Bible, it's referring to a multitude of fighters, and that's why you get army here. Be sure to check the notes after the vocabulary as well. They'll give you helpful ideas. So if goy means nation, it means Gentile, but um, it really means other nation. I think that's a better way to think of it. Goy is like a foreign nation or something like that to Israel. That's why we often translate it as Gentile. Um, the difference between goy and which I don't think that must have been a previous word. Just means a people, a group of people, a people group, something like that. So would be a word that could apply to Israel. Now, is not limited to nations and states. Is just a group of people or a type of people. So there could be, Amim within Israel as well, but Israel could be considered an So make sure that you read these notes because they'll give you helpful tidbits on the vocabulary as well. Mo, do you have any questions or topics that you want to discuss before I continue with the Futato lessons?
So, Bruce, thanks so much for the question.
Yeah.
I have a quick question for you. The army was Sava.
Mm-hmm.
So, start with this word. Start with what was that? Um,
The Tsade?
Saudi,
Mm-hmm.
Saudi, and it has a TS sound. So, I hear more about. I don't hear the T sound, but I hear the S sound.
Right.
So in some of the words, even on in dictionary, in logos, I tried and I don't hear the T sound. Uh, so my question is it possible sometimes just the T doesn't? I mean, they they don't bring it to the
Yeah.
when they pronounce it.
The difference is because English doesn't really have any words that are actual English words that begin with a TS sound. It's usually pretty difficult for native English speakers to make that sade, that sort of like
Okay.
sade. But we do make that sound at the end of words like hats or bots or, rats or something like that. So it is a sound that we make, but we're just so unused to making it at the beginning of a word that most people just eliminate that stop. They eliminate the T stop and they just say sade. So they would say sava instead of tsava. But that tsava, that's how it would be pronounced in Hebrew, is with that stop at the beginning, that short little tsava instead of just. It's really hard to hear over the microphone, I suppose.
That's true.
But you're not gonna run into an issue no matter how you pronounce it. You'll be fine either way, as long as you know it's a tsade instead of like a samek or a sen or something like that.
That's true. Appreciate it. I didn't know. Um, I try to learn it as much as possible and in a right way. And
Yeah.
but I appreciate all of the help and all of the work you put in this. It's very helpful.
Yeah, I'm glad. It's hard to learn Hebrew in and of itself, but to do it online is extra difficult. So we try to we try to do as much as we can to give tips and pointers and that sort of a thing. So if there's anything like that you're like, well, I don't quite get this or whatever. There's no question that's too small to ask. I want to make sure that everything does make sense as much as possible because it's kind of an uphill battle to conquer Hebrew online. So
That's true.
yeah, but yeah, again, the point of this class is to read Hebrew rather than speak it. So you wouldn't miss out on anything if you pronounce the tsade with just the s sound. That's perfectly fine.
Yeah. Well, I'm one of the. I'm enjoying the class really. I love this class, and I even going back to Hebrew one.
Mm-hmm.
We start from beginning the grammar, the vocabulary, and everything.
Yeah.
And, just refreshing, and I appreciate it, and I enjoy it because I can go back. I don't think if I'm in a class I can go back. I mean, I can go back to notes, but the videos are very helpful. Your conference is very helpful, and I appreciate you very much, Mr. Brusky. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for all you do.
Well, I appreciate that because, like I said, there are a lot of benefits to being able to take Hebrew online. It's much more flexible for people who can't, drop
Yeah,
everything and go to, especially during the pandemic. Like this was sort of everybody had to transition to this sort of format. So I'm glad we're able to offer
that's
it. But it does have its own challenges, so we try to minimize
that's.
those as much as possible.
I appreciate you very much, Mr. Brusky.
Yeah. All right. Well,
Love
I'll
attending
jump.
your class.
Yeah, well, and again, if there's anything that you run into that's like, hey, I really like this, and this, but here's one thing that I think could make it better. Here's one thing that you might try. Like any suggestions you guys as students have, we're open to. We want to find out kind of what works, what doesn't work, what ideas should we try out, because the goal really is to make this as helpful as possible.
Mr. Brusky, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Say that in future we will have a video that helps how we use Hebrew in Logos. Uh, that so we can continue building on the things we are learning on this foundation that you are laying down for us uh, in future through Logos.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I think that what I'll do is, and this would be the semester to do it once we've got a lot of grammar under our belt. I think what I'll do is I'll pick a week, maybe let's see, the midterm week won't have any Futato exercises. So week 9, which is right after the midterm week, I don't usually have a video conference that week. So I think what I'll do is that week, instead of not having a video conference because there's no Futato exercises, I think I'll just do a video conference, or I can do a video or whatever, where I kind of take a passage and then show you what can be done with Logos. I know not every student has Logos. Some people will use accordance. And I do have accordance. I'm just not as familiar with that. But putting Logos out there is better than putting nothing out there. So I think that's a good idea. I'll plan on doing that during week 9.
That will be wonderful. Is there any way, Mr. Bursky, that we will have the video, like some of the video you did before, so we don't lose it? We can go back to it in near future.
Are you talking about the video, like the conference videos?
Yeah, the conference like something that we can after the semester we can go and watch it again.
Yeah, what I try to do, now it doesn't always work. You can see down here, I've got this little timer running. I've got a backup recording of this video conference right now. And so what I try to do when this actually works is I'll try to upload that to my own personal YouTube page so that I can refer back to this, because these conference videos that we store in Canvas, they only last for a couple weeks there. So if you just type my name into YouTube, you can find my channel, and you'll see not every conference is up there because the video doesn't always work. But that's where I will keep those, and you can access those anytime.
That will be wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Brusky. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. All right, well, I will jump back into Futato here, and we'll finish these exercises. Let's see, we were on A, finish that up, and so we go to B. Let's look at B here. 17. Let's see, here we go. All right, so now we're looking at predicative demonstrative pronouns, and like I said, these are really demonstrative adjectives. And so just like with the adjectives, they can be attributive, they can be predicative, they can even be, well, it's hard to think of them as an example of substantival because they they really need something with them. Even, yeah, I just can't think of an example where you would have a substantival, but they are adjectives. So just like the attributive function is usually present when you have an agreement in definiteness between the demonstrative and its noun, and the attributive is functioning usually when the demonstrative comes after its noun. Well, when we go to the predicate side, we usually have disagreement between the demonstrative and its noun, and the demonstrative will precede its noun in the predicative function. So when the demonstrative does not match the definiteness of its noun, and when the demonstrative precedes its noun, those are both good indications that we've got a predicative relationship. Those are not 100%, but those are probably 90%, okay? This is a very reliable way of telling what the function is. Now, ultimately, you always have to, ask, does the translation make sense in context, all right? But if we use that rule, we can come through here and see where does, again, we're told that these are all predicative relationships. So, does the demonstrative precede its noun in every single one? And does every single demonstrative lack the article? Well, let's see. That's the case in number 1, number 2, number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Every single one, the demonstrative precedes its noun, therefore it's predicate, and in every single one, it lacks the article, whereas its noun has the article. So pretty straightforward there. Looking at C, now we could have either. How do we tell which is which? Well, anytime you see the demonstrative precede its noun, think predicative. And then you can check that, you can verify it by checking the article. So here, it both precedes and lacks the article. That means that it is predicative. Now, when it comes to gender and number, you should have this memorized as part of your familiarity with the demonstrative pronouns. Ze is always masculine singular. Haze is masculine singular, but it comes after its noun and has the article, so it's attributive. Ha-he is always feminine singular, and this is a far demonstrative, but it has the article and it comes after, so it's attributive. Ayla is always common plural. So we don't know if this is masculine or feminine based on Ayla, but when we look at our noun, we see that our noun is Elim, the gods, ha-elim, and that is masculine plural. So this is going to be predicative because it precedes and lacks the article, masculine plural. Number 6, we've got ha-begadim, ha-haim. So haim is always masculine plural. It's the far demonstrative. It has the article and it comes after its noun, so it's attributive. Hazeh, again, attributive. Ze is masculine singular. That's a near demonstrative. We've got Zot, Ha, Malkut, the kingdom. Zot is going to always be feminine singular, and it is a near demonstrative, and since it precedes its noun and lacks the article, it's going to be predicative. This is the kingdom. Here we've got hahu. Who is always going to be masculine singular. It's a far demonstrative, but it has the article and it comes after its noun, so it's attributive. This tent. The tent, this one, this tent. Number 10, we've got ha, here, ha aratzot, ha ele. Again, ele is always plural, but it's common. It could be masculine or feminine, so we have to look to our noun to determine the gender. Ot here, in particular, tells us that it's feminine. So we've got we've got a feminine plural, and since it has the article and it comes after its noun, it's going to be attributive. These are the lands. All right, let's look at D. Now, assure, the good news is there's really only one primary relative pronoun in Hebrew. You only really have to memorize one form. Now, technically, there's another one that gets used, but this is the primary relative pronoun, and it only has one form. In Greek, for example, the relative pronoun can occur there are some forms that overlap, but it changes depending on gender, number, and case. And so you could have as many as, 24 different forms of the relative pronoun. You only have one. It's probably more like 18 to 20 because some of them overlap, but you only have one form here. In Greek, you've got like 20 forms that you have to recognize. Here you only have one. The downside to that is you have to use context to tell whether it's plural, whether it's masculine or feminine, whether, how it's functioning. But that's not really a downside because in English, our relative pronouns don't really have gender or number either. Now, they do change depending on case. So, for example, who versus whom. But other than that, the Hebrew relative pronoun is a lot closer to the English relative pronoun than the Greek one would be. All right, so usually, you can translate assure a lot of different ways depending on context. It can mean which, who, whom, that, for which, to whom, for whom. It can mean a lot of different things. So in your preliminary translation, I feel like sort of the safest one to go with is which, and then once you get your phrase translated into English, you can now change which to a more appropriate English pronoun. So when I see this, the first thing I think is which, and then I'll adjust it later. So we've got Hamelech, Asher, Malach, the king which he ruled. So the king which ruled is probably what this is. Now I'm going to change which to who, because I think Hamelech here is the subject of Malach. Now, technically, because the relative pronoun in Hebrew does not change depending on the case, which is to say, it doesn't have a different form if it's representing the subject or the object, technically you could translate this as the king whom he ruled over or was king over. So that gives you a picture of one king being king over another king. When would that happen? So maybe it's like, what's a king? Let's say King David. Okay, King David is the king whom the Lord was king over. Something like that. Now, we don't have the Lord here. This is most likely, most of the time it's going to be best to translate this, the king who ruled. Or even better, the king that ruled. Rather than the king whom he ruled. Okay? So the king who ruled or the king that ruled. Number 2, we've got ha'isha esher shlacha. So the woman which she sent. So again, this could either be the woman who sent something, which shalach is the type of noun that, or I'm sorry, shalach is the type of verb that really needs, it really wants an object, which would make it tempting to say the woman whom she sent. But it's just so coincidental that this is feminine and singular and this is feminine and singular that it makes me want to say that this is the subject. But if this is the subject, the woman who sent, that's not a complete sentence, really. So it almost demands an object here. But again, you're going to translate a share who or whom. That's going to affect your translation in English. So that's something that you have to think about. Is this the object or the subject of the verb? That's a decision you have to make. Technically, both are possible. But again, shalach is the type of verb that really needs really needs an object. So if this is all of the sentence, I'm tempted to translate this as the woman whom she sent. Number 3, ha nevi'im asher amru. So here we've got the prophets who spoke. All right. And since you don't speak a prophet, I know that ha nevi'im is not the object. That's another good indication here. If Hamelech were the object of Malach, or if Ha-Isha were the object of Shalach, the woman whom she sent, this is definite. So I would really expect this to be after. I would expect this to be Shalacha Esher et. What would I expect here? Maybe that doesn't work. Maybe it would be different because of the structure. Either way, number 3 is pretty obvious. This would not be the prophets whom they spoke, because you don't speak a prophet. This is the prophets who spoke, or the prophets that spoke. Number 4, we've got hakesef asher babayit. So this is the silver or the money which in the house. So here we've got a verbless clause. The money which is in the house. Or you could just say the money in the house. That's probably how we would translate it in English. All right, number 5, we've got makomot asher yeshav. So this is places which he dwelt. Now this is very interesting because Hebrew will use the relative pronoun a lot of times for location, where we would usually use the adverb where. So this would literally be the places which he dwelt, but we would probably actually we would say this as the places where he dwelt. All right, so that's not a literal translation because we're shifting a pronoun to an adverb. But I think that that's a better way to say it in English rather than the places which he dwelt. If you want to say the places which he dwelt, you'd probably have to say the places at which he dwelt or the places in which he dwelt. So either way, you're adding something. Number 6, we've got ha zahav asher lakach. So here we've got the gold which he took, or he captured, or he seized. All right, so the gold which he captured, or the gold that he captured. Zvachim asher al mizbeach. Zvachim, this is the plural form of zevach, which is sacrifice. So this would be sacrifices which upon an altar. Mizbeach is altar. There's no definite article here. So sacrifices that are upon an altar, or sacrifices which are upon an altar. Number 8, we've got halechem esher echal. Halechem, the bread which he ate, or the bread that he ate. And then number 9, banim esher yatsu. Banim is the plural for sons, which yatsa is came forth or went forth, or came out or went out. So sons which came out or went out should probably be sons who came out. And again, sons is probably the subject of Yetza'u, because you don't come out sons. This would have to be in like the Hifil stem, which we haven't gotten to yet. We'll talk about that later on in the semester, in order for this to be the object. So this is pretty clearly the subject. So instead of the sons whom, it would be the sons, not the sons, sorry, sons who instead of sons whom. Sons who came forth or came out, or maybe sons that came forth or came out. All right, so I think we skip E and F. We go to G. Let me double check that. C, D, G, and H. All right, so on these translations, we usually pick the longest one here. So we'll go with, make this smaller, cover up our answer so we can actually do it. Go with number 5 here. So we have ba'et. Okay, so again, I'm gonna walk you through sort of my process for translating early on in Hebrew as you're learning how to, what is a good procedure. Okay, so you got this chunk of Hebrew text. Where do you start? What do you start with? Well, obviously you start at the beginning, right? I mean, where else are you gonna start? But what do you expect at the beginning? Okay, like what should you be looking for? Often, at the beginning of a Hebrew sentence is going to be the main verb. Less often, but still frequently, it's going to be some sort of relative clause that sort of like sets the scene. It's either like a temporal clause, which is, by the way, what we'll have here, or maybe an instrumental clause, by doing such and such, blah, 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 blah. So if I come to my Hebrew sentence, the first thing I'm thinking of is this a verb? Now, ba'et, it doesn't look anything like any verb that we've had so far. The vowel pattern is off. Technically, this could be a verb if these letters were different. The vowel pattern does look like a particular type of verb that we'll learn about later. But this isn't anything we've seen, so this probably isn't a verb. So what's my next option? Well, it's probably some sort of a relative clause, relative phrase, something like that. It starts with bait, this bait preposition. That's my guess, because when I look at ba'et, I see a bait preposition, and I see eight, which is the word for time. Now, I don't have I don't have a beit shavah, I have a beit kametz. And that makes me think maybe I have a definite article here. Now, definite article is patak dagesh, not kametz, except the ayin as a guttural can't take a dagesh. And so when you get this situation, often when we lose the dagesh because of the guttural, the patak will lengthen to a kametz. So we have here in the time or at the time, something like that. What's our next word? Ha-he. Well, here we go. We've got he. Now, he is either the personal pronoun she, or it's the demonstrative. the feminine singular demonstrative, far demonstrative, that one. In the time, the that. Now, or at the time, the that. If we were to translate this phrase so far, we would probably have something like, at that time. At that time, what? This is our relative, this is our temporal clause. It's not really a clause, it's a phrase. This is our temporal phrase. At that time, tidrosh. Tidrosh. Man, a dalet and a resh together is hard to say with no vowel between them. Tidrosh. All right. So what do we have here? We've gotten our relative phrase out of the way, our temporal phrase. We still don't have a main verb, so maybe this is our main verb. If this is a verb, then I should be able to break this back into a triliteral, a three-letter root. Most roots are three consonants, but we will learn about some particular roots later on called hollow roots or biconsonantal roots that actually have two consonants and a vowel letter as their middle consonant, as their middle letter, I should say. So we've got four letters. That means one of them is unnecessary. We've probably got an added letter here. So which one is added? Of all these three, or of all these four, which letter is added to the root? Well, usually when you've got too many letters, the extra letters are at the end or at the beginning. Rarely do you get an extra letter shoved in the middle. So what that means is dalet and resh here, position 2 and position 3, these are hardly ever going to be extra. These are almost certainly part of the root. But we should look at the shin or the tav. Does shin ever get added to a verb in conjugation? Well, not so far. We haven't learned of any verbal suffixes. We haven't learned of shin as a verbal suffix for any verbs. That just hasn't happened. Have we learned any verbs that have tav as a prefix? Well, yeah. In the imperfect, which is the prefix conjugation, tav is a prefix for all kinds of verbs. This is the prefix for the 3fs form of the cal imperfect, the 2ms form of the imperfect. It's the prefix for the 2fs, but that one also has a hierarch yod at the end. And it's the prefix for the 3fp, 2mp, and 2fp. Now, all of those forms also have suffixes. So the only two forms that have a tav prefix with no suffix are going to be the 3fs and the 2ms. If we take that off, what are we left with? Dalet, resh, shin. We're supposed to have three letters in our root. How many do we have? We have three. All right. We might be done. That might be our root, but we got to check. Is darash a verb that we've learned? It is. Darash, he sought or he inquired or he searched for. Now, inevitably, when you're reading your Hebrew Bible, you're going to come across words that are roots, but you've never learned them because there's just so many different roots that it will take a while for you to become familiar with all of them. In that case, just because you haven't learned it doesn't mean it's not a root. At that point, if you ask, have I learned this root? And you say no, then you go to your lexicon and you look up dalet, resh, shin and see if that's a verbal root. If it is, see if it ever occurs in the cal imperfect. And that will tell you that, hey, this is a good candidate. So it's something you have to consider. But here we know that darash is a root that we've learned. It means, darash itself means he searched for, or he inquired, or he sought. Now, the tav prefix indicates that this is cal imperfect, and it's either 3fs or 2ms. What am I doing? So we have to decide which one it is. If it's 3FS, we would translate it as she will seek or she will inquire. If it's 2MS, it will be he will seek or he will, or I'm sorry, not he, you. You will seek or you will inquire. But we need more context to determine which one we should go with here. All right, so we'll set that aside for now. We'll move on. Et, this is probably 80% of the time, maybe more, going to indicate our definite direct object, especially when, it's et makef definite article. So seek what? Seek God, the God, but God, because, if God is a name, then it's definite. So either seek God or seek the God or seek the gods, maybe even. So that word doesn't help us decide whether this is you or she. Let's keep going. Ha-kayim. All right, well, kayim, this is a hirik yod mem suffix, which means that kai is the adjective kai rather than the verb that we're going to learn about in, Unit 2. Kaya here, kayim here is the adjective for living. So because it comes after its noun and it agrees in definiteness, it is attributive. Seek the living God. That still doesn't tell us whether this is she will seek the living God or he will seek the living God. Let's keep going. Seek the living God. Bechol. Bechol is with all. Libcha is lavav with the kaf suffix. This is the 2ms suffix. With all your heart. And with all nafshecha, your soul. So we have at that time, she will seek the living God with all your heart, masculine. That doesn't make sense. If this is 2ms and this is 2ms, then this must be 2ms. At that time, you, masculine singular, will seek the living God with all of your heart and with all of your soul. All right, so let's see what Futato has. At that time, you will seek the living God with all your heart and with all your soul. There we go. All right, Hebrew. Let's go with Genesis 15:18. Oh, I need to pull that up here. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. All right, so this is a good chunk. I know that there's more here than what we have in, let's see, here we go, than what we have here. But let's just read it in context. What we can't figure out, we can't figure out, but this will be good pre-learning for later on. So, bait, definite article, yom. So, in the day, that one. So, in that day, karat. Karat is the verb he cut. So, in that day, Yahweh cut et Avram. Yahweh cut with Abram brit, a covenant. Lemor. This literally means to say, but it's it's an idiom in Hebrew. We would just say in that day the Lord cut with Abraham a covenant, saying, and he said, let's see here, Lazar, Aha. This is a little bit tricky. We've got the Lamed preposition. We've got Zerah as the root. This means offspring, descendants, seed. And then Echa is the 2ms possessive suffix. So for your offspring or to your offspring. Natati, this is a Cal perfect 1cs conjugation of Natan. You can see the final noon assimilates into the T suffix, which is our Cal perfect 1cs suffix. So this is saying, for your offspring, I have given the land, this, or to your offspring. I have given this land to your offspring, or to your offspring I have given this land. Min Nechar. So Nechar is the word for river. From Nahar Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is the word for Egypt. This is a proper noun, so it's automatically definite. This is a construct noun, so it takes its definiteness from Mitzrayim. From the river of Egypt, which is probably the Nile. Add, so this would be up to or as far as Ha-Nahar Ha-Gadol, as far as the great river, Nahar Prat. This is actually the word for, in Hebrew, this is the word that gets translated as Euphrates. I think Euphrates is a Greek word. I think. I'm saying that primarily because of the U beginning, but this would be the Hebrew word for that river, Furat. So to the river that is Euphrates. All right, so backing up again, we've got in that day, or on that day, the Lord cut with Abraham a covenant. So he made a covenant with Abraham saying, to your offspring I have given this land from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river that is Euphrates. All right, well, there we go. Lesson 17 in the books. If you guys have any other questions, or if there's anything I didn't cover, or let me get over here. There we go. If there's anything that I didn't cover or that you still have questions about, do not hesitate to send it to me. I want to make sure that I answer all of your questions. This week, again, earlier in the video, we covered a little bit over chapter 18, the one yod vav, the one yod yod, and the one aleph imperfects. So if any questions come up over those, do let me know. I'm happy to help out. I think I'll also, I mentioned with Mo that week 9, I'll do a little bit of exploration in Logos, so you can kind of see, how would I tackle a passage? What can I find out? I'll probably start from the English and show you how you can go from English to Hebrew, just because, let's be honest, not everybody's going to keep their Hebrew sharp. So that'll probably be more helpful, and that way you can refer back to it, as you need to. But I will also explore features of the Hebrew as well. And I might have to break that into a few different videos, but hopefully that'll end up being helpful. And then you guys can give me feedback after I do that and say, hey, you didn't cover this, or hey, you did this, but I don't know how you did it, or whatever. Give me feedback so that I can clarify things. All right. That'll wrap it up. Hope you guys have a great week. Like I said, let me know if you need anything. Take care.